Hi, everybody. It's Jay, and I am so excited that you are here with us for episode 1 of Jessie Gussman's sweet romance novella, Car Kerfuffle. Before we begin, because we're releasing this on December 23rd, we thought it might be nice to spread a little extra Christmas cheer. We're going to do that by reading the story of Jesus' birth from the book of Luke, chapter 2. And it came to pass in those days that there went out a decree from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be taxed. And this taxing was first made when Cyrenius was governor of Syria. And all went to be taxed, every one into his own city. And Joseph also went up from Galilee, out of the city of Nazareth into Judea, unto the city of David, which is called Bethlehem, because he was of the house and lineage of David, to be taxed with Mary, his espoused wife, being great with child. And so it was that, while they were there, the days were accomplished that she should be delivered. And she brought forth her firstborn son, and wrapped him in swaddling clothes, and laid him in a manger, because there was no room for them in the inn. And there were in the same country shepherds abiding in the field, keeping watch over their flock by night. And lo, the angel of the Lord came upon them, and the glory of the Lord shone round about them, and they were sore afraid. And the angel said unto them, Fear not, for behold, I bring you good tidings of great joy, which shall be to all people. For unto you is born this day in the city of David a Savior, which is Christ the Lord. And this shall be a sign unto you. Ye shall find the babe wrapped in swaddling clothes, lying in a manger. And suddenly there was with the angel a multitude of the heavenly host praising God and saying, Glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace, goodwill toward men. And it came to pass, as the angels were gone away from them into heaven, the shepherds said to one another, Let us now go even unto Bethlehem, and see this thing which is come to pass, which the Lord hath made known unto us. And they came with haste, and they found Mary, and Joseph, and the babe lying in the manger. And when they had seen it, they made known abroad the saying which was told to them concerning this child. And all they that heard it wondered at those things which were told them by the shepherds. But Mary kept all these things, and pondered them in her heart. And the shepherds returned, glorifying and praising God for all the things that they had heard and seen, as it was told unto them. Thank you. And now, here is episode 1 of Car Kerfuffle. Merry Christmas, everyone. This is Car Kerfuffle. Written by Jessie Gussman. Performed by J. Dice. Chapter 1. Her car was gone. Blythe Mason looked at the dark blue sedan in front of her. Nope. It was similar to her car. Same color, same general shape, same make and model. But she peeked in the back window again. No booster seat. No coloring books on the floor. No backpacks, pencils, children's meal toys, or little trucks or dolls on the floor. Dread settled in her stomach as she fingered the key fob. It felt the same as hers, looked the same. But since this vehicle in front of her wasn't her car, the key fob could hardly be hers. She eyed the trunk, her heart pounding in her chest. Maybe Zayden, her brother-in-law, ex-brother-in-law, and owner of this auto repair shop, had cleaned out the interior of her car when he changed the oil and put the snow tires on. Maybe he'd forgotten to put the booster seat back in. If he had detailed the interior, it would be the first time in 4 years, since he'd started servicing her car for free. Swallowing, she double-pressed the button to open the trunk. "Please let them be in there." She didn't close her eyes to pray, and the prayer wasn't even finished in her head when she knew it hadn't been answered. At least, not with anything other than a no, which seemed to be God's standard answer to her. Slamming the trunk shut, she clicked the lock on the key fob. Spinning on her heel, she marched down the sidewalk and back into the empty shop. Zayden's shop was always busy, but he had said he was planning on closing early this afternoon and staying closed through Christmas. He'd graciously agreed to do her car very last minute when she'd explained that her front tire kept going flat. He wouldn't charge her for the tires, nor for the oil change that he probably did. He would have checked everything else out, too. He always did. She didn't know anything about cars, and Zayden had a vested interest in keeping her safe, since he loved his niece and nephew and wouldn't want anything to happen to them. So she trusted him. Of course, she'd also trusted his brother, her ex-husband Ken, and that had been a major mistake. One that she'd put behind her. She needed the reminder. This time of year, being a single mom sucked more than any other. She wasn't even going down that rabbit trail. Right now, she needed to figure out what happened to her car. Her low heels clicked in the vast, empty interior as she crossed it, angling for the office door where Zayden's head was visible, bent over some papers on his desk. Getting things in order before he left the shop for the Christmas break, probably. She tapped on the glass before opening the door. His eyes, a deeper, darker green than Ken's, widened when he looked up. He stood immediately. "Is there a problem with your car?" he asked, his brows knitted. "Kind of." She tilted her head and tried not to notice the way his t-shirt strained over his chest. "It's not mine." She almost smiled at the expressions that crossed his face. First, confusion. Then it became thoughtful, probably as he tried to figure out what had happened. Dawning shock. Horror. The last one scared her. His face scrunched up as though he knew the next few minutes were going to be painful. "You're sure?" It wasn't a question, but she answered anyway. "Yes." He blew out a breath and lifted his cap to run his hand through his hair. Ken had always kept his neatly trimmed, but Zayden's had a tendency to grow long, like he couldn't remember to get it cut more than once every 6 months. "I'll call Joe, but I'm pretty sure I know what happened." He picked up his phone, his brows drawn together. "We had another car in here, same color and model as yours. It broke down in town, and the owner rented a car to get home to New York. Her sister lives here, though, and offered to drive the car to New York since she was going to be going up anyway for Christmas." His lip twisted in a small apology and he raised his hand, palm up. She wouldn't have known it was the wrong car. His mouth flattened. Joe should have known better. "Don't blame Joe," Blythe said quickly, even though she had no idea what she was going to do about the fact that all the gifts, every single one, that she had bought for her kids were in the back of her car, which was, apparently, in New York. She didn't want Joe to get fired. "I know he's a good mechanic, and he's always been so nice to me when I'm here." Joe was the type of man who didn't seem like he had a lot of book smarts, but he could fix just about anything. "Well, in his defense, the woman who owns the car has a name very similar to yours. He probably didn't take the time to sound out the name, just grabbed the key under the name that looked right." "Yes, I totally understand. However, I'm wondering how I'm going to get my car back." "Well, the sister is coming back down here after Christmas." "That's not going to work," she interrupted him. "All of my children's Christmas gifts are in my car. My mother is actually watching my children, and I was planning on wrapping everything tonight." She trailed off, tears, unexpected, stinging her eyes. Why did nothing ever go the way she planned? She had intended to finish college but got married instead. She'd intended to be married forever, but Ken cheated. Christmas gifts might seem like a small thing in comparison, but this was her Christmas with her kids. They were with Ken last year, and he'd taken them to some big ski resort in Montana. If that's what he did for a 6- and 8-year-old, who knew what his gifts in future years would be? She couldn't compete with him and his new wife, and she wasn't even going to try. But she had wanted to make Christmas magical all the same. Zayden's dark eyes studied her across the desk. He was taller than Ken and broader in the shoulders, but the real difference was in their personalities. "Guess I'm driving to New York this evening then." His lips curved up. "That's a pretty good hiding spot. I always looked under my mother's bed and in her closet." She blinked back the stinging in her eyes and forced her lips to curve up. "When they were younger, that worked. But Lottie found her birthday stash under my bed last year, and I had to up my game." He laughed, his eyes crinkling and his cheeks creasing in deep, well-worn lines. Blythe's heart stumbled and her eyes darted around the small but tidy office, landing on the neat desk. "I hate to put you out so close to Christmas." "You're the one being put out." He pushed the button on his phone. If he noticed her sudden uneasiness, he was too kind to say so. "I need to call the other customer. Your car probably hasn't even arrived at her house. I think it's about 4 hours away." He clicked the screen a couple of times, then pulled the keypad up on his phone. "Did someone drop you off?" "Yes, but my car was sitting outside, or I thought it was my car, and she left." "That's fine. If it's okay with you, I can drop you off at your house. I have about 5 minutes here." "I appreciate it." He put the phone to his ear, and she turned away, wandering back toward the door. If he went straight up and came straight back, that would be 8 hours. She would still have time to wrap the gifts. She'd just have to do it early tomorrow morning instead of late tonight. Since the kids were staying the night at her mother's, that would work out. "Hello? This is Zayden Crile, the mechanic." "Yes, I bet you were just about to call me. I'm so sorry." "Right. Of course. I was planning on bringing it up tonight." "Great. Okay, I have your address and phone number. I can text you when we're close." "Yes. Thank you so much for understanding." "No problem. Merry Christmas to you too." She watched in the door glass as he set the phone back on his desk. "It's a go." He checked the time as she turned around. 4 hours up, 4 back, and I'll have to take Grandpap with me, so give me an hour to stop and use the restroom a couple of times and to feed him once or twice. I should be back by midnight or 1 o'clock. Of course, it was the screw-up of his shop, and he should be working this out for her. But she couldn't help thinking that Ken would have found a way to blame her, or at the very least tell her since he was doing her car for free, she could go get it herself. But Zayden wasn't like that. Sure, he wasn't as serious and driven as Ken. He had an easier smile and a more laid-back way. 10 years ago, next to Ken, he had seemed immature. Now, her stomach did a slow turn. Now, he was exactly what she'd be looking for if she were looking to start dating, which she wasn't. Except for one thing. Ken had told her years ago, when they'd first started dating, that Zayden was gay. Zayden watched Blythe walk out his office door. He still had a good mind to call Joe and ream him out, not that it would do any good. It would only hurt a good mechanic's feelings. No, he had to shoulder the blame for this himself. He'd wanted to ease the burden that Blythe carried. Ken had been a jerk to her. She didn't deserve it. Zayden couldn't fix Ken, but he could help out with Blythe's car and the occasional maintenance around her home. She didn't really go anywhere, but he watched her kids occasionally and had Rand, who was 10, helping in the shop on Saturdays. Paid him a little something. Picking up his phone again, he made a quick call to his grandpap about their change of plans for the evening. Grandpap loved car rides, and Zayden knew he wouldn't be turning this one down tonight. He promised to be ready to go. Over the years, Zayden had taken the kids camping and on other day trips, trying to step in to be a father figure to his nephew and niece. Blythe had even come on occasional trips like when he'd taken them to the amusement park this past summer. He had to be careful about trips like that, though. It was too easy for him to picture his brother's former family as his own. Blythe had never indicated that was something she was interested in. 10 years ago, she'd had her choice of either of them, and she'd chosen Ken. He'd buried his heart in his work and forced himself to stand down. "She didn't want you, man." Ken had assured him that Blythe wasn't interested in blue-collar men. She was attracted to skilled professionals. Still, since the divorce, he'd tried to help her out. Like today, but apparently no good deed went unpunished. His whole body wanted to sink into the floor over the switched-out car, but he was doing all he could to fix the problem. After shutting down the computer and washing his hands in the small restroom off the side of his office, he strode out. He got to take her home at least. Maybe that was God's little Christmas gift to him. "You're smiling." Blythe stood by the side door of the shop, waiting. "I don't usually have a beautiful woman waiting for me to get off work." Her mouth formed a circle before she dropped her eyes and fumbled with her purse strap. Stupid mouth. He'd tried hard to treat her like a sister. After all, he could hardly do fun things with her and her children if he caused her to want to avoid him because he scared her away with his true feelings. Grabbing the car keys from the rack inside the door, he took one last look around the shop to make sure everything was closed up before he hit the light switch and followed Blythe out the door. The dark blue sedan was parked in front of his pickup. "Oh," Blythe stopped on the sidewalk. "I could drive the car to your house, so you'll have your pickup at home." Zayden scrambled to think of an excuse to keep her in the car with him. "Nah, tonight when I get to your house, I'll walk home." His house was only a few doors down from what had been their family home growing up, and where Ken and Blythe had set up their home after getting married. They planned on getting a bigger home after Ken had been in practice for a few years. Ken had, and he'd moved into it with his girlfriend. "But your truck will still be here." "I'll ride my Harley over tomorrow. I've been wanting to do a little winter maintenance on it anyway." She shrugged, and he figured she didn't care one way or the other whether they rode together for the 5-minute drive home. It was hard on his heart, but not surprising. "If it's okay with you, I'm going to stop and pick Pap up on my way through and grab a change of clothes." "Sure." She winked at him. "Actually, would you mind stopping and picking up my gram? She was going to help me wrap gifts, but there's no reason we can't still spend the evening together. She's at the senior care home a couple of blocks down from your house on Oak Street." He adjusted the route so they'd pull into the front of the facility. "No problem." "I'll give her a call and let her know we're on our way." Blythe punched some numbers into her phone and had a short conversation with her gram, a feisty old lady that Zayden had always liked the few times he'd been around her at family gatherings. Blythe ended the call and looked over at him. "We'll have to get him and my gram together again. She's mentioned like 100 times how much fun she had with him at the 4th of July when we all took a picnic and went to Ramey's Dam and watched the fireworks over the lake." Perhaps mention that at least as much. Zayden had his own good memories from it. He'd fed Blythe 2 s'mores because she said she loved them, but could never eat them without getting the marshmallows all over her. It had been too dark for her to see the heat in his eyes and the longing on his face. Hopefully. He opened her car door, and she reacted the way she always did, with a little jerk of surprise, then a beautiful smile. "Thank you." His heart leaped. He breathed deeply as she slipped into the car. Her cinnamon vanilla scent flavored the air. His hand tightened on the door before he closed it. The driver's seat was too high and too far forward. He had to adjust it before he could squeeze in. Blythe laughed, and the sound sent waves of longing through his chest. "It's not nice to laugh at your knight in shining armor." "It's okay when it's the knight's fault that I need a knight in shining armor in the first place." He shifted into drive and pulled out. "You might have a point there. I really am sorry." She fingered her purse strap and looked out the window. "I know. It's not like you did it on purpose. I wouldn't even be upset if I hadn't had the brilliant idea of hiding the kids' presents in there." "Technically, I just made sure that your kids would definitely not find them." Her laugh filled the car and squeezed his heart. "I hadn't considered that. Does this mean you expect me to thank you?" "Maybe you don't have to go that far." "It's not the first time I owe you a thank you. Rand just loves going to the garage to work on Saturdays, and I really appreciate you putting up with him." "I'm not putting up with anything. He works for his money. Lottie's welcome to come down too." "Maybe when she gets a little older." Blythe sighed and looked out the window. "She always wants to do everything Rand does, and it drives him crazy. This is Rand's thing." Zayden nodded, flipping on his turn signal. Blythe didn't say Rand wished his father had time for him, but she didn't have to. "I knew when I married him that a doctor worked long hours." Zayden nodded. She hardly ever said anything bad about Ken. She'd mentioned once that she didn't want to badmouth her kid's father. But there was a lot to complain about. After all, Ken didn't work on Saturday or Sunday, and Blythe had mentioned to Zayden that their custody agreement gave him the right to every other weekend. He seldom took them. Figuring it might make Blythe feel better to know that Ken wasn't completely at fault, he said, "Sherry complains if he works 60 or more hours a week, then spends the whole weekend with his kids." Her head twisted toward him. "I thought that might be it, but I've never heard her say anything." "She mentioned it at Thanksgiving." Blythe's mouth dropped. "Were the children around to hear?" "No." He'd been clearing off the table with his parents. It was after dinner and the kids were already in the room watching a movie with Grandpap. Her chest deflated, and they sat in silence for the rest of the short ride. He pulled around the half-circle drive and parked in front of the sliding doors. "She said she'd be waiting at the desk. They won't let her leave until I sign her out." "I can't believe your Gram puts up with that." "She hates it. I'd love to move her back in with me, but since Ken left, I work during the day." Her voice trailed off, and she got out of the car without saying another word. Anger, low and hot, twisted in his stomach. Blythe had worked while Ken was in med school, supporting them both. He'd promised in return that she'd be able to be a stay-at-home mom when he started practicing. Just another of his brother's lies. Zayden hopped out of the car when Blythe and her Gram emerged from the nursing home. "Zayden Crile, you're high-stepping with my granddaughter again, you sly thing." Blythe's Gram pointed her cane at him and shook it, smiling like she actually missed him. "It's good to see you again too, Gram," he said with a cautious glance at her cane, which pointed back at the ground like it was supposed to. "You're looking good." "Stop with the nonsense.
I look like a 70-year-old old lady, and nothing you say is going to change it."
Zayden met Blythe's laughing gaze with his brows raised. "Okay," he said as he opened the back seat door.
"Now, if you really want to help me, you can tell me where that handsome grandfather of yours is. He hasn't called me since last week."
Grandpap called her? Blythe's blank look and shrug said that she didn't know anything about it either. "We're stopping at my house. You can ask him about it yourself." Zayden waited until she tucked her cane in before closing the door behind her.
"They did have a good time together on the 4th,
Blythe said as she rounded the front of the car.
"but I didn't realize that it might be more than that."
"Never occurred to me either. It'd be good for Pap to have someone to talk to. He comes to the garage almost every day and talks to the customers, but I think he does that because he's lonely."
"We'll have to do some matchmaking after Christmas," Blythe said.
Chapter 2. They pulled up to Zayden's house, and Blythe unsnapped her seatbelt. Her Graham stopped chatting to take a breath, and Zayden took advantage of the small silence. "You don't have to come in. I'll be out in 5 minutes, tops."
"You're driving the whole way to New York. Take an extra few minutes for a shower." Blythe paused with her hand on the latch.
"Unless you want us to wait." "Oh, no, not at all. Come on in." Zayden didn't usually get flustered, but his cheeks flushed, and his fingers fumbled for the latch. Surely there wasn't a reason he didn't want her to come in. He was out of the car and had his hand on Graham's latch.
"This will give her and your pap a chance to chat too,"
she said as she came around the car. His bicep twitched under his t-shirt, which was all he wore despite the December chill. His lip curved up. "I think you found your calling. Matchmaker." She laughed. Somehow Zayden could always tease her out of any bad mood.
"That definitely sounds more fun than administrative assistant, but it probably doesn't pay as well."
"Probably not. The fun jobs usually don't." He opened the door and offered his hand to her Graham. As Graham's translucent fingers gripped Zayden's straight, calloused ones, a flutter tickled her chest. He was always so careful of her children, mindful of their small size next to his strength. He didn't rush Graham, but stood with patience while she fussed with her cane and purse. In the 12 years she'd known him, he'd had very few girls around and no steady girlfriends. Maybe he didn't like girls. She narrowed her eyes at the broad shoulders. That was none of her business. She hustled over to Graham's other side and took Graham's elbow. Zayden helped them up the steps and opened the door, ushering them inside. The house was an old brick Victorian, and Blythe had never tired of looking at the original woodwork, pocket doors, and built-in bookcases. Zayden always had a repair project going, and often had Rand over on Sunday afternoons helping. "Should have told me we were having guests. I'd have put some more soup in the pot." Zayden's grandpap stepped into the far doorway that led into the kitchen, a short, frilly pink apron tied around his waist. With his coveralls and big black Velcro-strapped sneakers, he made an interesting sight, and Blythe's lips twitched. "We're not staying, Grandpap. Actually, I was hoping you'd ride with me to New York. We gave Blythe's car to the wrong person at the shop, and I need to go get it."
Graham looked at Blythe. "Couldn't it wait until after Christmas? I'm sure these two are just as busy getting ready as anyone."
"It's okay, Graham. Don't give her any grief. It was my mistake. Plus, she really does need to have her car back."
Zayden looked at Blythe. His deep green eyes sent a little thrill right to the spot that had fluttered earlier.
"Can you explain the rest to them? I'm heading up to grab a quick shower and get this grease off me."
She nodded, and he went out through the arched doorway, taking the steps two at a time.
Through the banister rails, she could see his strong legs, and a little thrill went through her. Sure, he'd messed up her car, or actually his mechanic had messed up her car, but Zayden took the blame and also the responsibility to fix the screw-up. He hadn't said one bad word about his mechanic, which she appreciated.
Why are you making that poor man drive to New York on the day before Christmas Eve? Why not just make him pay to rent you a car and he can go get it sometime next week?
Graham's slightly raspy voice cut through Blythe's thoughts. She turned, fingering her purse strap.
All the gifts I bought Rand and Lottie are in the trunk of my car.
Graham and Pap stared at her for several silent seconds. Grandpap broke the silence by hooting and slapping his leg. That beats all.
Well, Graham said drewly, guess they won't be finding them before Christmas.
Still chuckling, Grandpap waved an arm at the comfortable blue couch and love seat in the formal living room. You ladies can have a seat for a few minutes. Zayden doesn't mess around when he's cleaning up, and he'll be right down, I'm sure.
Thanks.
Blythe stepped more fully into the room from the entry hall, looking around, admiring the beautiful architecture. It didn't look like two bachelors lived there, with the tasteful decor that included long flowing curtains in the oversized windows and a marble fireplace. The only thing that hinted at anything less than professional decor was the Christmas tree that blinked in the corner. A hodgepodge of ornaments randomly placed gave it a slightly lopsided look. One string of colored lights blinked, and one string, nearer the top, didn't. The angel at the pinnacle leaned slightly forward.
I didn't think Zayden was much of a decorator.
Blythe helped her Graham settle into one end of the couch. Pap laughed as he hobbled over to the other end and eased down. He's not. You know his mother. Oh, that's right. She'd forgotten Mrs. Crile was an interior decorator. Since the divorce, Mr. and Mrs. Crile hadn't had much to do with her or her children. In fact, even though the Criles lived in Amaranth, not far from her home, she didn't have any Christmas plans with them.
I'd forgotten,
Blythe said. She noted the pictures on the fireplace mantel, one of Rand and one of Lottie, as she took a spot on the love seat. They were in plain frames and didn't seem to match the rest of the decor. Had Zayden put them there himself? As much as Zayden had done with her children since her divorce, she hadn't been in his home much, and she hadn't had many personal conversations with him. He was a great guy, always willing to help, and dependable. When he said he was picking them up, he was there. But as for his private life, she hadn't ever asked. A memory, firelight and s'mores along with fireworks and cool evening air, drifted through her head. He jokingly fed her s'mores when she said she couldn't eat them because she always made a mess on herself. For her, the world had narrowed to the two of them, and it had been all she could do not to lick his fingers and maybe nip them while she was at it. That evening, her whole mindset about Zayden had shifted, and as hard as she tried, she couldn't get it to shift back. Blythe took another glance around the room as she settled back in the comfortable seat. Grandpap and Graham seemed to exchange some kind of speaking glance, and Blythe smiled to herself. She could see those two getting together. Just because they were old didn't mean they couldn't fall in love. Even if there wasn't hope for Zayden and her, they would have to get together and work out some matchmaking plan for Grandpap and Graham. A mechanic magazine lay on the end table and she picked it up, pretending to be interested, just to give the older couple a measure of privacy if they wanted to make eyes at each other. Grandpap and Graham talked about the new senior center, while Blythe listened with half an ear. Less than 10 minutes went by before Zayden came down the stairs behind her. She stood as he came in the room. His cowboy boots clicked on the hardwood floor. "Can I talk to you in the kitchen for a minute?" he asked. She nodded while he told the older couple they'd be just a minute. She walked behind him through the formal dining room and into the kitchen, admiring the way his dark blue plaid button-up stretched across his shoulders, narrowing where his leather belt emphasized the narrowness of his waist and hips. His crisp blue jeans emphasized his strong thighs and legs. Blythe shifted her gaze to the dark walnut hardwood floor. She'd seen him dressed like this before. It was pretty much his standard dress when he wasn't in his old t-shirt and black jeans he wore in the shop. He waited until she followed him into the kitchen and closed the door carefully behind him. 2 coffee cups and a plate sat in the sink waiting to be washed, but the counters were cleared and the island with 4 bar stools was tidy. Only a stack of mail sat on one edge. The stools were pushed neatly under the top overhang. Zayden gave her a sheepish smile. "I don't want to be presumptuous about your gram, but we were just talking about her and my pap." He trailed off and ran a hand through his still wet hair, ruffling it. She never noticed that it was slightly curly, but it wasn't usually this long, curling out over his ears and the nape of his neck. Maybe he caught her look because he shrugged. "I need a cut, but I'm going to have to wait until after Christmas now." "I could do it." She clamped her mouth shut. Where had that come from? "You cut hair?" "I always cut my dad's and my brother's." She lifted a shoulder, although a little longing went through her that she wasn't going to see her family for Christmas. "It saved money when I was growing up. I cut Rand's now just because he hates sitting in the chair." "I'd love it if you would, but I don't want to put you out." "It's the least I can do after all you do for my kids." "They're my niece and nephew. I want to spend time with them." He probably spent more time with them than their own father did, but she wasn't going to go there. "I was just thinking upstairs that it might be a good opportunity today to have your gram go with Grandpap and me to New York. I promise I'll take care of her," he added quickly when her face scrunched up. "I know you will," she assured him immediately. "I just hate to put you out even more than you already are." "It's not a huge deal. Grandpap is already going with me. He doesn't really have a choice unless he wants to sit here by himself all evening." "He could come to my house," she heard herself say. But hey, why not? It wasn't like she had plans. Not anymore. "Would that be better than me taking them with me?" he asked, his voice low, his green eyes searching her face. She looked away, suddenly uncomfortable with their closeness and her reactions to him. He'd been a great uncle and a good friend. If she started getting weird on him, she could lose it all. "It's up to you. You might end up stopping a lot with 2 older people in the car." "I don't mind. It's not like there's a race to get back." What a difference from Ken, who saw everything as a race or a competition. She opened her mouth to say that was fine, but snapped it closed with his next words. "You could go too." Her mouth dropped. He shifted his feet, and a flush crept up his neck. "I mean, I'm sure you have better things to do this close to Christmas, and I've already put you out enough with losing your car to begin with." "I appreciate you taking responsibility for it, but we both know it wasn't your fault." He just asked her to go to New York with him? She hadn't misheard? She could hardly believe it, and frantically searched her brain to try to figure out if he were just trying to keep her from being alone this evening, since he already knew her mother had her kids. Or did he really want her? He shoved his hands in his pockets. "It's my business. I can't always control what my employees do, but I have to shoulder the blame. If he'd forgotten to put the oil cap back on and your car had blown up 50 miles down the road, that would be my baby too." "Not everyone thinks that way." He shrugged like it wasn't any big deal. Maybe he regretted his offer since he didn't repeat it. The silence stretched between them. He put his hand on the door, ready to walk out. Well, maybe she won't be interested. Let's go see what they say. She nodded and they walked back out, her chest swirling with disappointment. Hi, this is Jay, and thanks for listening. If you're ready for another great audiobook, here's one we think you might like. Or check out the playlist with all our latest releases. Don't forget to subscribe to Stay with Jay, give this video a thumbs up, and tell us what you liked in the comments.